Hey everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Jack Mullaly Discussions. Now, anyone who knows me knows that I've gone a little bit podcast crazy recently. Obviously, I'm producing this podcast, but I've also been watching heaps and heaps of them. And there's a reason for that. It's because I'm getting a lot of benefit from them. But there's a common theme to the podcast that I'm watching. Because while I'm watching lots of them, I'm really only watching a few different series, or listening to a few different series, because a bunch of them are audio only. And the common theme with the ones that I'm listening to lots at the moment are they're almost always interviews. And they're almost always interviews with a different person every time and a really interesting person from really wide different aspects of life. So, they might be entrepreneurs or they might be chess players. And anyone who watches the Tim Ferriss show will know that I'm kind of stealing his intro with these examples. But nonetheless. I've been watching lots of these podcasts. And when I started Jack Mullaly Discussions, I was really keen that as soon as I could, I'd jump in and I'd do some interviews of my own with people that I find fascinating, so that you can get to know them a bit and learn from them. I'm super excited because today is the first of those interviews. Today, we're going to be talking with Daniel Diamond. So Daniel is a sports psychologist from Melbourne. He studied at the University of Queensland, where he graduated with a Master of Applied Psychology. And he runs let me get the name of this right, out of shot here, I really should have remembered this, but anyway, the Performance and Sports Psychology Clinic in Melbourne, Australia. But he works interstate and internationally as well. I first came across Daniel at the Australian Mountain Bike and Trials National Championships in Brighton, Victoria earlier this year. And at that time, Daniel was giving a short presentation about sports psychology to interested athletes who were there at the day. So I went along just going, I'll see what this is all about. It's got to be interesting. And he said some things that really, really resonated with me. In particular, they were things that I went, hey, you know what? I've been working on something really similar to that recently and been having a bit of success with it. I reckon there's something in this. So when the chance came up to start doing Jack Mullaly Discussions and to start doing some interviews, Daniel's name was like top of the list. I was like, I gotta contact him and have a chat. So he did, and I'm very grateful that he said yes without too many questions. And so here we are. So we sat down, we chatted for about 45 minutes or so, and we talked about sports psychology in general. We talked about the psychology of bike trials, particularly using my experiences as a reference point to talk about these things. And then we also, towards the end, branch out a little bit and talk about how we could take some lessons from the sports psychology space and apply them across into a professional sense as well. So it's a great chat. There's heaps of really good stuff in it. So I encourage you to, have a listen. Do what I do with these podcasts and put it on while you're doing something else, cooking dinner or that sort of thing. And enjoy what Daniel has to share with us. One thing I will say before we get into it is this was the first time I had recorded an interview, and we were using Google Hangouts to do it. And Google Hangouts are great, right? It's web-based video conferencing that you can record. You can actually even broadcast it live, but we didn't do that. We just simply recorded it. And so we're using Google Hangouts, and it's great so long as you have a stable internet connection. We didn't have a stable internet connection, and so we had some glitches. And as a result, I've had to do a bit of editing to piece this back together so you guys don't have to sit through the slightly painful moments of silence or of us sitting there going, "You're still there? Daniel, I got you?" There you are. So anyway, I've had to do some editing. The content's wicked. There'll be a few moments where things glitch around a little bit and you'll probably be like, what just happened? It was an internet dropout and we've fixed it up. So nonetheless, content's great, discussion's great. You're gonna really enjoy it. So without further ado, here is Daniel Diamond. Cool. Hi, Dan. Thanks for taking the time to have a chat this morning.
Cool. It's good to be here. Thanks.
Cool. So I was keen to have this chat because I saw you present with respect to sports psychology at the Australian Mountain Biking Championships earlier this year in Bright.
Yeah.
And I was really interested on that particular day because some of the things that you said resonated with some stuff that I had been trying recently when riding in the sport of bike trials. And so I was like, okay, cool. Any opportunity, let's have a bit of a chat and see what comes of it. So before we get into things, I'm always really interested to know why it is that people do what they do. If I can ask you to take a little bit of a look back in time, when did you get interested in sports psychology?
Yeah, right. So probably around, was 2015 now, so 2002, 2003, so 13 years ago. I did a sports science degree back in the UK, and I was really interested in the psychology components of that degree, in combination with my own experiences in sport, such as tennis and football, soccer, and cricket. And when I went down that path of exploring the psychological side of sport, I just took a hold of me. I was really interested in the emotional component of sport, and that led me to come to Australia to find the best courses here up in University in Queensland. And I was fortunate enough to have really good supervisors who helped me challenge the status quo of sports psychology, going beyond traditional positive thinking and really looking at what's happening in the brain under pressure, under stress. And from there, it really just took a hold of me, and I'm now fascinated with how people and teams, individuals as well, perform under pressure, and how their mind can get shifted to relevant stimulus and irrelevant stimulus, all depending on a bit of past experiences and beliefs.
Okay. So there's, I mean, even in that short little introduction, there's clearly heaps for us to dig into here. Yeah, you mentioned that you came out to Australia specifically to study because so you came to UQ specifically because it was a good course. Is Australia quite renowned in the sports psychology space, or?
Yeah, I would say the course at the University of Queensland at the time, and certainly probably still now, is one of the leaders in the world for a postgraduate course. Actually, when I left UK, there wasn't a sports psychology masters you could do.
Right.
There is now. There are quite a few, but when I left the UK, Australia, and I think there was one in Canada as well, and maybe another one in Hong Kong.
Okay.
There were very few and far between, but the field is burgeoning, and I think we find as there are more and more professional sports psychologists, eventually more and more teams and organisations will start recruiting them as well.
Yeah, right. So at a high level in sport, is it common, like, I don't know, let's use the AFL or the NRL or something like that as an example. Is it common for those teams to have sports psychologists on board now, or is it still in the minority?
It's getting there slowly, and sports psychologists are used in different ways. So you could be literally just running a program to half a dozen players once a week, as some AFL clubs do. You could be there 3 days a week, working with coaches, players, background staff members. You could be doing just recruitment for them, and you could just be consulting on a needs basis. So it's really, there's I would say every team, I'd be surprised if every team doesn't have a sports psychologist in some respect. So whether it is just a consultancy service, recruitment, or 3 or 4 days a week, there'd be a sports psychologist in most teams, I'd imagine. Yeah.
Okay, interesting. So you've had evidently some level of involvement with mountain biking.
Yep.
Is that fair to say? Because you came along and gave the presentation at National Champs.
Well, I was fairly new to the mountain biking environment when I gave those presentations, but since then I've certainly done a lot more work in that space. Yeah.
Yeah, cool. So I might jump into what interested me in particular when I heard you speak. So in the lead up to Nationals, I don't 100% know when this took place, but I'll say sometime in the couple of months before Nationals, I'd stumbled across a technique that suddenly gave me some traction. So I was obviously I compete in bike trials, and I had been trying to do get up a particularly large obstacle using what's called a side hop. And it is exactly what it sounds. You're hopping on a bike and you jump sideways up a wall. And I was working on a particular wall that was beyond my PR at the time. It was only by a couple of centimeters. So like, it's pretty marginal. You know, I'd done 128 centimeters and this was 130 or something like that. And in the past, when I tried to push past my PR, I'd always found it very intimidating. You'd look at the wall, like I'd be standing beside it and be fine. But as soon as I'd get on the bike and it's set for the move, it would suddenly be very intimidating.
Sure.
And I had previously been of the school of thought where, oh, well, try and think positively about it. You know, you can do it, you can do it, you can do it. Almost try and bash any self-doubt out of the way. And for some reason on this particular day, I changed my mindset and decided to tell myself, I was like, as soon as I get on the bike, what I'm going to tell myself is, this wall is going to look really big, but you can do it. Like, you can do 128. So there's no reason that 130 is fundamentally outside your comfort zone. And it completely changed my attitude. Suddenly the wall didn't look big. And as it turns out, I got the move on my second or third go on that particular day. And then fast forward to in Bright, you were talking about how the best practice in sports psychology has moved away from, I suppose, positive self-talk and positive thinking in this way, towards recognizing that stuff can be hard and scary and dangerous and coming to accept it, which to me felt like what I had been doing. Is that a fair call?
Yeah, I mean, essentially, the move away from that need for positivity or removal of discomfort is essentially where sports psychology is going, in my opinion. By the sounds of what you did is from that difference of that you can do it, positive reinforcement type loop that you were in. There was no what I class integration. So you're trying to stay positive, and you were saying positive affirmations about you being able to do it. But what wasn't happening is there was no acknowledgement to what was happening in the brain, which you might talk about a bit later, even subcortically. So the brain split up into different areas, but you weren't acknowledging your discomfort, and that doesn't mean that's going to go away. It means that's actually going to override your performance ability. So until you acknowledge the difficulty and acknowledge how you're feeling, you can't integrate those emotions with your thinking styles, which is by the sounds of it, what you did afterwards.
Okay. So how does this fit? Because I've always been I've not quite understood that when I'm riding and say doing something sub-maximal, it can even be like 90% of my max. So it can still be pretty big, but not at the absolute max. Stuff just runs on automatic, and self-doubt doesn't even enter the mind. It's just like, this is just going to work. And then, but at a certain point, the self-doubt enters. And I always found it really interesting that with the positive self-talk side of things, what would happen is I'd be telling myself, you can do it, which is probably accurate. But I would suddenly completely lose the subconscious ability to do the moves.
So when you're running at 90%, you say you're doing things you've done many times before. Excuse me. What we're talking about here is ultimately recruiting areas of your brain that are part of motor planning and motor control. So the brain loves to predict the next of now. Okay, it loves it. So what I mean by that is you're riding along, or you're on the bike trials, and you're quite comfortable in these scenarios because you've done them before, time and time again. So it's predicting what's about to happen, no problems, and it bases what's about to happen on the past. Okay, so that's what it likes to update. When we suddenly push ourselves into scenarios where the brain doesn't have information about what's going to happen. It pushes itself into uncertainty. And with uncertainty, we lose a sense of control. And humans love control. We're comfort-seeking, distress-avoiding machines, or our brains are anyway. And one of the things I like, a side note about mountain biking, is that you're constantly putting yourselves into uncomfortable experiences, and you're pushing yourselves to that limit, which is great. It's a great learning experience. But we're still comfort-seeking and distress-avoiding machines. When we have uncertainty, we lack control. We lose our perceived sense of control, and then our brains are going to search for comfort. So when we have to go out our comfort zone, and our brain is saying, "No, I want to stay comfortable," that's when the struggle to perform occurs. There's a big difference between doing what's comfortable and doing what's right for performance.
Okay, so on that basis, is it the case that there's, I suppose, almost two ways to stretch your ability from that point of view? You can either try and make more stuff comfortable, or increase your ability to perform when you're out of your comfort zone?
Usually both. Yeah, both. So humans, being these control-seeking machines that we are, you don't go into a mountain bike trial competition without training, and you train because that gives you more control.
Yep.
Okay. So it's there's an old saying in sports psychology about controlling the controllables. So yeah, sure, control all of your motor control that you need to do, motor skills, your fine-tuning of your technique and things like that. At the same time, there's going to be uncertainty. There's going to be, everything's going to be ever changing. You're not going to be riding exactly the same scenario, twice, 2-3 times in a row. Things are ever changing.
Yeah.
Even the slightest little detail is a change. It's like even if you're going first or second in a competition, it's a change. And so there's when we meet uncertainty and what I call transience, changing, constant change. That's when we need to start to learn to embrace and accept the emotions that come up, because the brain's going to say, "I don't like this," and it's going to evoke an emotional response.
Okay, interesting.
And then that's where the struggle is, right? So it's a struggle to overcome those emotions. And so because they're uncomfortable, the brain goes, "I need to seek comfort." But actually acceptance, accept our mind to attend to what we need to attend to the actual task. So if you look back at your experience of making the 130 centimeter side jump, think about where your mind went. Think about what you attended to when you were struggling to perform versus when you actually performed. What was the difference there? Can you remember?
Well, I'd say when I'm struggling to perform on anything in that sense, the main difference I would say is that there's no clarity of thought. So when I'm either on automatic or when I'm at the edge of my limits and using this kind of acceptance mindset, that there's absolute clarity of what's going on. It's the only thing that matters is doing that move, and it's not really threatening. Whereas previously trying to just think positively about it, I'd be telling myself it'll be fine, it'll be fine, it'll be fine. But what my brain's actually thinking is, you're going to muck this up and fall on your face. That to me that's what I think is different there.
Yeah. So I mean, you're right. So no clarity of thought. Now I'm just going to pause there and just have a think about that. No clarity of thought. Now, sports psychology is extreme psychology. So what I mean by that is, imagine that lack of clarity of thought and extend that to someone who has anxiety disorder, and they're thinking that all day.
Right.
So you're experiencing in a small moment what some people with some mental illness experience 24/7. How exhausting that must be for them.
Yeah,
so I just wanted to pause that and get a realization for that for you and for everybody who's listening to that. Saying the idea of when we're lacking clarity of thought, you think about what you're doing. All your attention is on this fight and struggle, positivity versus the mind self-doubt. And it's just fighting. It's fighting. There's no task relevant thoughts going on. Your mind isn't attending to the thing it needs to attend to. And that's why not only have we moved away from positive thinking, or I've moved away from positive thinking in my work, but it can actually make things worse.
Yeah, that was certainly I would say that was my experience with it, is that if I tried to use it and didn't manage to do the move very quickly, so from the moment that I felt threatened to then trying to use the positive self-talk, if I didn't then get it effectively straight away, the odds of getting it on that particular day were gone. Actually, not the odds of me getting it, the odds of me trying the move is actually the difference here. It would normally have been crippling enough that I just wouldn't attempt it. I'd go and do something else.
How comfortable is that short-term comfort seeking? The brain loves. Yeah, makes sense.
Yeah. So, okay. So you've talked about how this is a kind of the new paradigm in sports psychology. Is there other stuff that's also changing or emerging in this world at the same time at the moment?
Well, can you elaborate on the question a bit there?
Oh, I'm just what I'm kind of trying to get at here is, okay, so I heard you talk about particular things at the seminar at Bright, and therefore I've directed this conversation so far around that particular thing that I heard. As well as I'm saying, is there other stuff that's attached to this or linked to it that we should talk about that I haven't picked up on as of yet?
Yeah, sure. So I mean, the techniques really. So the fundamental underpinning of performance psychology is the philosophy of becoming comfortable with discomfort.
Okay.
And the why. Okay. The why, it's in service of performance and what you as a person or as an athlete want to stand for. Okay. As humans, we cannot bear pointless torment and pointless pain.
Okay.
Right? We cannot bear it. Okay. However, we can endure great discomfort when we see it when we see the purpose of it as being meaningful.
Okay.
So the fundamental basis of that is obviously, think about it, we can endure great pain if we see the purpose of being meaningful. So can we accept that discomfort? When I say pain, I mean discomfort, in service of who we want to be, our best version of ourselves, our values. So when we're talking about like a layer, if you looked at a pyramid almost, we might say becoming comfortable with discomfort in service of our values. So we have to look at what the best version of yourself is, who you want, what you want to stand for. You get clarity of that and you start to connect with your values, then suddenly your values become more important than whether or not you feel discomfort. So your brain starts to go, my values are more important than my emotions. I'm going to focus on them rather than struggling with my emotions.
Values are more important than your emotions, so you're going to focus. Okay.
So what you start to do is you start to integrate. Again, I'm going to use that word maybe a lot today. You start to integrate your values with your performance, and then just because you have emotions, great, even an intense emotional experience, you can still ground yourself in what you want to stand for, and you commit to the behavior in line with your values. For example, let's say one of your values is to be bold. Okay, so or courage. I value courage, and in session with me, for example, you might be talking and trying to work out why courage is so important and being bold is so important and such an important value to live by. And there might be a number of reasons why that is. No judgments, but there might be a number of reasons. And we start to internalize that under pressure. So when you enter competition or even training sometimes, and you're going up to a side jump, for example. Am I using that term right, side jump?
Side hop would be more common, but side jump will work. So
side hop, apologies. A side hop, and the emotions are rising. So your anxiety and the pressures are rising. You know at your heart you want to show courage. So that becomes more important to display than struggling with the emotion.
Interesting. Okay. Yep.
Okay.
So a few things that you mentioned there triggered a couple of different tangents that I'd be intrigued to explore. Talking about, I suppose, values and sport, I certainly had an interesting experience a couple of years ago. So I'd always very much been the, well, I suppose anyone who's in a competitive sport probably has to be a bit of a type A competitive person. But I'd always very much been, I would ride because, and I wanted to win, and to not necessarily win at all costs, but win at pretty much any cost. And what that manifested itself in trials, because the riders are taking turns at attempting the sections, is you can, well, I suppose this would work in mountain biking racing too, but obviously one way you can win is to ride really, really well yourself, but the other way you can win is for the other people to make mistakes, and I suppose that's true for any sport.
Yeah.
And so I used to find myself very, or sitting there and, you know, things might be tight and hoping that the other person would make a mistake. And that's wasn't exactly a very fulfilling way to spend my career, competitive career. It's like, it's not a constructive space to be. But then I took a couple of years where I was cross training, doing a bunch of CrossFit, and, you know, for all the positives and negatives of CrossFit, one thing that I really got out of that was, because every day you go into the gym and there's a whole bunch of other people you're training with, and every workout is effectively set up as a competition, I really quickly had to drop that ego of wanting to beat other people from them losing, because it's not sustainable to see the same people every day and train with them and have that antagonistic behavior. So after even really a few months of CrossFit, suddenly my attitude had changed to, yeah, sure, I want to win, but I want to win purely by doing my best. And if the other person happens to ride better on that day, good for them, so be it. But it was, and that, yeah, that was an element of almost making that value of, I'm going to do my best, but then be absolutely happy for anyone else who can do better. Yeah, that seemed to, changing where that value sat in the scheme of things then appeared to change my ability to behave on the bike. Yeah, I'm not sure where that was leading, but what you were saying there triggered that thought in me.
I mean, that's an important thing you're talking about there, because, I mean, number one, your mind's doing something very, very natural, like wanting to win, hoping other people are going to stuff up. It's trying to control the environment. Hope is you know, the element of control. Unfortunately, it's not doing a damn thing apart from wasting a lot of energy and stress, because every time you hope that someone stuffs up and they don't, it's going to violate an expectation in the mind. Excuse me. It's going to violate an expectation in the mind, and you're going to get more stressed because of it, and probably more angry and agitated, right? So it's just a control mechanism. It's a control mechanism to win. It's not helping you because you can't control it, but all you can control is yourself and how you perform.
Yeah.
There's which in turn would actually have more an effect on your opponents. So you performing your best will put pressure on other people to perform at their best, and actually thereby increase your chances of performing well, but not through trying to somehow think your way into their minds, or think your way into some sort of supernatural way of controlling them by hoping. But anyway, then when you're saying the next part is, through CrossFit, you would have learned a few other values, maybe doing your best, you would have learned the value of, or you'd have got in contact, I should say, with the values of persistence or relentlessness, or something to do with pushing yourself through a certain barrier. But also you learn humility.
Yeah, and it was like, I think even through competition in trials, I had been aware of the unhealthiness of this, win at all costs sort of attitude. But I think in the case of the CrossFit, it was literally that instead of it raising its head, once every month or something at a competition, suddenly it was raising its head every single day, and that just the sheer magnitude and just how often it was happening, it just brought it to the forefront of my mind. I was like, this has to change. This can't stay this way, because it's going to self-destruct, really.
Right. Exactly right. So this idea of trying to control the entire environment, or to win at all costs, and your mind doing this thing is actually incredibly stressful. It doesn't like it. You'll find a stress reduction and a more ability to be grounded and centered and present when you find the values that are important to you. So not only are values important to ground yourself when the pressure's on, but they can actually reduce the pressure, because values are 100% in control. You're in 100% control of your values and how you commit to them. Yeah.
So a similar note to that would be, again in my trials competition. So I probably need to give you a bit of background here. In trials, obviously trying to get over a bunch of obstacles, and you got this thing where when the obstacles are within your limit, then obviously the challenge is to perform very, very accurately within your limits. And then you get stuff that's on the fringes of your limits, and it almost becomes a numbers game, where you can attempt to do the obstacle and risk crashing, in which case you'll be penalized quite heavily, or you can choose to deliberately put a foot down and take a smaller penalty to get over that obstacle. And so it becomes a game of maths there. And because for a lot of my career, I wasn't a particularly powerful rider, so I couldn't ride this, I had a massive tendency towards putting the foot down and taking a sacrificial dab, taking a small penalty rather than risking the very high likelihood of taking a large one. But more recently, I've become more athletic, and then changed my value towards really valuing trying to do everything, even if that risks a loss in competition. And that in some ways, I think, has also been that's possibly tied into this freeing up of the win at all costs attitude, because now the way I've defined success perhaps is actually attempting everything wholeheartedly. I think there's something that ties in there.
Yeah. So by the sounds of it, there's a few things going on. Whilst you still might want to win, that's every athlete wants to win. It's just how much focus they put on it. So what you're saying to me is suddenly you're valuing achievement. I'm going to try everything. I'm going to commit to every skill or the highest level on all the jumps that I need to do, and all the parts of the trial. And why you do that? What's that in service of?
So you're asking me why had I chosen to change my values towards valuing trying everything? Is that what you were asking?
You didn't even change your values. You just decided to let go of focusing on this win at all costs, and you decided to there was something else in it for you. You're like, I'm going to commit to everything here. Obviously, you recognize that this win at all costs attitude wasn't necessarily helping, right?
Yeah. I wonder, certainly a part of it was that I recognized that if I wanted to get significantly better and to be able to do significantly better on a world level, I had no choice but to become more explosive and to be able to do big stuff. So there was an element of like at a national level, I could go around and do relatively well by, do the stuff that I can do, and then muddle my way through as best I can. But it was never creating the stimulus that would challenge me, so that when I went to a world level, when stuff is and harder and higher, that suddenly I was massively out of my comfort zone. So I think a bit of that change was going, if I'm going to grow into a world's level capable, I need to be trying everything at an Australian national level.
So okay. I mean, we may not even be able to come up with the value today, but when that's not even necessarily the most important thing. But down that shift in mindset away from winning. Now think about the focus on winning is so tough on a sport like mountain bike trials, because you have zero control over your opponents. At least in tennis, you can control your opponent by the way you play to a degree.
Sure.
To a degree. Not completely, but to a degree. More so than in bike trials or AFL.
Yep.
Okay, because you're interacting. There's no interaction in bike trials. So in this focus on winning, it's same as golf. It can be so stressful and takes you away from being that ultimately the athlete and the person that you want to be, being the best version of yourself.
That's interesting, because trials certainly does have some elements where, sometimes like the riders don't necessarily behave great to each other, and there is some of that intimidation and that sort of thing. I wonder whether that is spawned out of the fact that is the only way you can try and exert any influence over a competitor.
Yeah. So, I mean, that's would make sense, but ultimately, in that moment of when you're in the arena, it's just you.
Yeah.
So figuring out what that best version of yourself is helps you a withstand the intimidation of others because you're transcending it. So talking about transcending, so when you understand that best version of yourself, you can transcend the intimidation from others or the mind games beforehand, and you transcend outcome because ultimately the only thing that you're aspiring to do is be value driven. And then that allows you to put all your attention where it needs to be, which is on task focus.
Interesting. Does when athletes start to recognize that and start to implement things along those lines, do they ever feel concerned that they lose their edge, so to speak? I was listening to an interesting podcast from Tim Ferriss the other day, who is known as an author and also a angel investor in startups and a whole bunch of stuff. And he was talking about how he's a very strong type A, competitive, high achieving personality, but he has been using meditation to tone himself back a little bit to achieve a whole bunch of other happiness in his life. But he was saying how he feels concerned a lot of the time, or he's got this persistent worry that the meditation is somehow stealing his edge. And it seemed to me that there might be a parallel here because I've experienced something along these lines where when I did come back to trials with a little bit less of this win at all cost mentality, it took me at least a little while to get my performance on the bike back up there. There was an element of not caring about the result, which did hamper my performance. Does that pop up when people start experimenting with this?
So that's a really interesting question, and one that does come up a fair bit. But what I'll say to that is, with the athletes that I work with, when we're doing values, is that I want them to care more about their results. But to worry less about the outcome. So what I mean by that is, if we can establish their values behind why winning's important, why results are important to them, then we can establish a higher standards. So we can get them to commit to their values behind winning, behind the goal of winning, to underpinning it, remember? Underpinning everything values.
Yeah.
And when we're worrying less, we're not actually spending unnecessary time focusing on what others are doing, hoping they're going to stuff up. Plus, I'll say one other thing that's really important to this, with meditation. When we're talking about mindful meditation and the work that we do about acceptance, we're not reducing emotions. So with some meditation, you actively seek to dumb down the emotional intensity.
Okay.
With mindfulness and acceptance, you're not asking to dumb anything down. You're asking them to just be more willing to experience that intensity. So the edge shouldn't go away. If you're doing meditation to reduce your edge, then sure, that could be a concern. But with mindfulness, even though sometimes the emotions will subside as an outcome, that's not the aim. The aim is, the purpose of it is to be more willing to experience discomfort so you can commit to your values to perform, not reducing the emotional intensity.
That's building. I'll take us on a little bit of a tangent here, because one of, as I was saying to you before this, one of my interests here is obviously, we've talked a lot about how to apply the sports psychology to trials, but one of my real interests in having these conversations is also around how we can cross learnings from one aspect of life into others. So I've got interests, particularly a professional interest around water education, water management, etc. And you mentioned quite early on in this chat something along the lines of the human brain likes to use the past to predict the future. Or you said the human brain really loves trying to predict the future and it uses the past to do that. Is that?
Sure. Yeah.
If I remember that correctly? Yeah. So that's come up for me in a professional space before, where we've been talking about, say in stormwater management, things are just in one particular way now, and we've been talking about how maybe that needs to change in some respect, but we don't know what it needs to change to. And then been thinking about, do we run workshops for people to try and get them to figure out what that future is? But we've always found a bit of a conundrum where when we do try and, even collectively with a group of like 20 people or something, try and figure out what that future is, seem to end up defaulting back to using the past or the present. It's like, so ultimately, end of it, what we actually arrive at is essentially exactly the same future with a slight change to it. I'm not sure whether does that trigger any thoughts with you as I describe that, or I know it's a bit of a, like, it's not exactly aligned, but I thought there was something in that. I'm not sure. What I can maybe rephrase that to make that a little bit more specific to you. In what way does the fact that the brain uses the past to predict the future, in what way does that manifest itself in what you do, or how do you work with that? Maybe that's the question. When that is happening for an athlete, how do you work with that and maybe change that? Or
you can't change it. It's happening beyond your conscious control.
Okay.
So I think I would have shown you, if you can remember, a video on changing celebrity faces.
Oh yeah.
How they became distorted. And it was the previous photo distorting the present. So the mind's predicting what the next photo is going to be based on the previous information it just received. And it's a different photo with different eyes, different forehead shapes, and the picture becomes distorted. So what we have to realize is what you might do in something like this is some real inquisitive, creative type thinking. So if you're going to try and hack the system, okay, you need to do a few things. First of all, you need to know what's going on in the past. You still need to know that. You need to know what current information you do have. Plus, you need to be really creative in your thinking. So you need to, and there are some good exercises on that, how we activate creative type thinking, creative ideas, and really continue to push, just keep seeking those more extreme ideas, those extreme type thoughts, to get to somewhere as far away as possible from keep regressing back to the same stuff, like you're saying with this water management stuff.
Yeah.
So really important to engage in creative thinking, and encourage, actually actively, this is the really important thing, because the mind can, when we get into these environments, these focus groups with 20 people, we tend to regress all the way back into a mean type of thinking. But it's actually important to go on your own, just think of the wackiest, the craziest ideas you can possibly have, come back to them, and then you might be able to see some convergent styles, and then just keep playing with ideas based on them. It's really important, even if it feels far, you've got to go to somewhere random. If you want to move away from the norm, and it's quite difficult, and it's very purposeful, and it's effortful, because the mind likes to just go back to its old thing, its old thing. So got to go into creative style of thinking. So you need to take yourself out of the environment you're used to as well.
Yeah, it's interesting. We've certainly experimented with, when we want to do this, with changing physical environments to do it, making sure that we don't, for example, do it in standard office spaces or that sort of thing, because it's, the change in environment sets a tone of, oh, something's different here, and maybe relaxes or, changes stuff up for people. Cool. Okay, so look, I'm conscious of time here because we're kind of coming up towards the end of our time. So I might just throw a couple of maybe short answer questions at you that I'm just curious about here. And I'll admit that I may be blatantly stealing some of these from other podcasts that I've listened to, but that's fine. We build off what others do. So what book or resource do you most often point people towards? Maybe let's frame this up as sports psychology. What book or resource do you most often point people towards if they want to know more about this sort of thing?
I don't point anyone to a sports psychology book per se.
Okay.
I'll point them to a book called Mind Sight by Dr. Dan Siegel. Okay. If I had it here, which I might do actually, I'll just bring out.
Cool.
There we go. So this book here.
Okay.
Mind Sight. This one's excellent because it goes into some really well thought out and really practical explanations of the brain. And I'll just ask them to relate it back to their own sport.
Yeah. Okay. So people to look at it, read it, and then interpret it into their own context.
Exactly.
Cool. So one final question. When I mention the word success, who is the first person that comes to mind, and more importantly, why?
From an athlete or
in general, anything.
So top of my head, straight first person that popped up was a sports psychologist called Michael Gervais, spelled like Ricky Gervais. He's a psychologist in America, USA, and he springs to mind because he has very similar philosophies to me. And when I listen to him talk, really resonates with the ideas that I have about sports psychology. So that's probably why he works a lot with Red Bull's Extreme Racing, Seattle Seahawks, the NFL team, and a few others, high-profile guys up there. So that's probably why it springs to mind. Yeah.
Okay. Interesting. Cool. Well, look, it's been a great chat for me. Thank you for humouring me as I explored some of my own little experiences, but it gives me gave me a good good context for this discussion to happen from. Before you go, where can people find out more about you and what you do and that sort of thing?
Yeah, probably the easiest thing to do is go to my website, which is pspc.com.au. So I run the Performance and Sports Psychology Clinic here in Melbourne, and we have online and office times for consults and things like that. Run workshops around the country as well. On my LinkedIn page, Daniel Diamond, is who you have to look for.
Okay.
Contact me.
Cool. Sounds really good. So, look, thanks for your time. Thanks for having the chat, and hopefully we'll have a chance to catch up soon.
Yeah, most welcome. Anytime.
Okay. Cheers, mate.
Cheers.